What is going on, everybody? This is Lack of Lepers. Thank you so much for joining us on our flagship program. This is Confic Call-In, the podcast, also known as SCP Meta. I'm your host, SCP-CRNP, aka Lack of Lepers, and I want to thank you very, very much for joining us on this beautiful, beautiful Saturday. We do this every Saturday at 11 a.m. CST, and we go for about an hour. This is a call-in show. You'll see a phone number on the bottom of the screen if you're on our Twitch. But the number is 316-444-3115. That goes to a live phone number that we will answer as you call, and listen to what you have to say. Questions, comments, criticisms. Feel free, just call in, let your voice be heard. This is a talk show, and it's really supposed to be the platform in the space dedicated to open discussion, where we can talk about anything that you would like. So I want to thank you for coming. We do have a full plate today for the show, so I do want to get into that. But before we do, just a few housekeeping things to say. First of all, I will not be doing this next week. Next week I have to be out of town, including Saturday. So this show will be canceled for next week, and then we'll pick it up, of course, the week after that. And then additionally, later on in this week, Thursday night typically are more casual reaction streams. I will not be able to do that. And Friday night is typically what we did last night, which on the screen you may be able to see. Basically, on Friday night, we do our really gauntlet-style review of all of the SCP Wiki articles that came out that week. And so we did that last night. Here it is. You can go to the LOL vlog to see that. This is just my meager YouTube page. This is where all the videos from Twitch will end up living permanently, because Twitch only keeps them for so many days before it deletes them. So this is what we did last night. We went through the last week. We talked about a lot of SCPs. We had some nice engagement there, so I want to thank the people who were there, who participated. And we had a little bit of an echo issue at one point, but we fixed that. That shouldn't be an issue anymore. So we won't do that this Friday, because once again, I'll be out of town. But we're going to still do the show, still cover all the SCPs. We'll just push that back to Sunday. So not Friday this coming week, but Sunday we'll do this again. And look for also the speed run version that will show up on the Confic Magazine YouTube. Just type in Confic Magazine YouTube to Google, and you'll have the gist of that. All right, so let's dive in to this. We got a lot to talk about today, a lot to cover. First, in local news, we'll just start with Confic Magazine this week. So this week's publication was actually by yours truly, and this was really a first for me. This is an original composition that was posted to the magazine called AOE 40322. It's in the proprietary format of the Confic Magazine LLC, which is AOE, Anomalous Object Entry. And the main difference between this format and others in containment fiction is that this one, like I said, is proprietary. So anybody who writes in it, as long as they obviously have permission from us, has full rights to the work, copyright, distribution rights. So for example, if somebody on YouTube covers your article in the AOE format, not only would they have to get permission from you, but you could actually theoretically benefit monetarily from that as part of the deal. So this went up this week. It's decently long, but we got our own version of collapsibles in here. So I do recommend that you check that out if you haven't yet. We are very interested in featuring more original works. And on that note, we may have a contest coming up, so just keep your ears to the ground for that. Okay, we already got through this. We already got through that. You can email admin@conficmagazine.com if you have any submissions that you would like to show. Now, having said that, obviously what we do every week is go through all the SCPs as part of our Twitch stream, like I said, last night on Fridays. And so this week, we've read all of them. If you really want a granular, detailed discussion of all the ones from this week, you can check that out. The link will be in the description. You can also go to conficmagazine.com, and all the social media links are up there at the top, conveniently for you. This week, the SCP recommendation is SCP-6246. This does have a decently sized rating for being, less than a week old, but it's just a wonderfully brief, very, very charming piece that I think just hits the pitch it's trying to go for perfectly. It is written by, I believe it is Jack Waltz. Yes, it is. So congratulations to Jack Waltz. It's just a very pretty article, doesn't overstay its welcome, and is just of very, very high quality. So definitely want to say shout out to the author there. Also want to thank That Owl Dude for being here in the Confic Lounge. Appreciate that. All right, so there's our recommendation for the week. So let's branch out a little bit into larger community news. So something big happened this week that a lot of us kind of geeked out about that didn't really receive, I think, as much attention as it really merits. But this was at some point this week on the 3rd of May, so this was 4 days ago by now, someone from the wiki.community forums posted a thread, and the summary of it is, I've created a community Discord server. And so this is a link to it right here, and over the course of the last 4 days, people have really just poured in to it. I think it's gotten a decent bump of participants, not huge, nothing too dramatic or anything like that, but I think it has about 52 members. Right now there's 17 online. So it's relatively new, it's relatively small, but this is just really cool to see. There's a lot of support features in here. This isn't an official one. It's run by just somebody, this individual here, Liger, I think I'm saying that correctly, who's a wiki.community admin and a volunteer, but who is not really official. Is not. This hasn't been stamped with the approval of Michel Fracoiwak, So this is unofficial, but it's still helpful. There's a lot of great things. I do encourage you to go check that out. I'll put the link into both the Twitch and our Discord, which you can get to, by the way, if you would like to participate this way. You can basically go to our Confic Magazine webpage and get to it that way. So I'll share that here. And so you should check it out. We actually have a lot of cross-platform involvement, so people from Liminal Archives, Discord, people from, obviously, ours. I think the SCF is probably the most represented in this new Discord server, and we even have a few people from SCP as well, some from international branches, but other people who you might recognize that at least peeped their head before realizing that the SCF had already sort of settled and subsequently probably left. But still, check it out. We won't bite. It's just a nice, more config, holistic sort of place that I think a lot of people can mesh, which I think is sorely needed in the space. You have these very staunch walls of separation and differentiation, and even our server, which is sort of advertised as the melting pot of the community, is itself quite cordoned off, if you will. So check that out. This has been interesting, and there are some interesting discussions already taking place in that server. And then in my browsings around the SCP Wiki, which of course I do probably daily, I came across something that I wasn't too familiar with. I hadn't known that it existed. This is several weeks old by now. But I thought this was interesting. It's a little outdated. We kind of maybe missed the mark just a little bit for something like this. But it's basically a podcast, and it's presented by two individuals who are very interesting to see together. Rounderhouse, who's quite active in the space, obviously. And then Green Wolf, who, if you don't know, Green Wolf is a real old school name. And so to see Green Wolf do something like this is interesting. To see Green Wolf around again in the last few months is interesting as well. And of course, like I said, the combination of Green Wolf and Rounderhouse promises to be interesting. So I'll put this once again in our servers for links in case you want to check that out. I'll probably check that out at some point, maybe even Monday, because that's when we do our casual nightly reaction streams. And Rounderhouse seems to be a fan of when I do that for his products, for his media products. So I might do this one, less so because of Rounderhouse himself, but just because I think this is really interesting. It's supposedly going into detailed coverage of Department Con and really the culmination of that. So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. I think this probably is going to be pretty good. So give it a listen if you haven't already, and hopefully if you didn't know about it, now you do. Something else that came across the radar on the SCP subreddit was this discussion post. And the title of it is, "Sometimes I Wish the SCP Fandom Was a Little More Simple and Down to Earth." And so this, I think it's worth a read. It's not particularly long, but the TLDR given by the author here is that I wish this fandom had less eldritch gods and end of the worlds and book-length documents, and instead were about simple monsters or objects or buildings that are easy to understand and the Foundation could believably contain and keep secret. So I think if you read this, most people who are attentive to the space will sort of see this as a flawed argument. It doesn't really have a lot of support. I think down here, of course, Reddit gives us some upvote statistics, and this is 65% upvoted. So it's interesting to see it come down on one side of the fulcrum. Still, despite being rather uneducated, I would say, when it comes to the space. So, for example, I understand that in a fandom like this, there will never be one consistent canon or timeline, but why are there dozens, if not hundreds of pages like this? And the pages he's talking about are things like when day breaks, where it kills 6.8 billion people in 24 hours. And there's seemingly a misunderstanding here that is acknowledged, but at the same time still sustained, that basically these things should be more canonical. So it's just odd. It was an odd discussion point, and I think the people in the comments sort of take care of this pretty well when it comes to just correcting the misunderstandings that are sort of embedded in this, and also just taking it in the other direction and arguing for the other side of things. And then of course we have Pixelated Harmony that I am now seeing here show up and make a statement as well, which is true, also another true statement. So, it's just interesting. This really sort of is a gauge for a couple of things. Not only the sort of casual person's knowledge level of things like modern day SCP, which of course we try to educate people on when it comes to the weekend collapsible, with basically catching you up to speed on the new things coming out. But it also is interesting that, once again, that it's not highly upvoted, but it's still, majority of people still upvoted this. So it just is interesting to see the sort of demographics and their preferences on things like RSCP. Having said that, if you don't check out RSCP, there's some pretty cool stuff here. A lot of it is, sort of meh, like this, but then occasionally you get these absolute gems. This, for example, on the screen is an 8K by 8K image of SCP article cross references, which is astounding. I mean, it's obviously very beautiful, as well as potentially informative. But yeah, if you haven't checked something like this out, I would encourage you to do it. They get some really strange things on this Reddit. A lot of meme work, which is cool. Slightly not safe for work stuff. In fact, a few of these things are blurred out, like this one right here on the screen is tagged not safe for work. It's got 1,600 upvotes. So a lot of cleavage going on here, kind of the stuff you would expect to see. But if you don't check out the subreddit, occasionally it can be a pretty good and interesting thing where you might not find other things. So, for example, we have this copy of the graphic novel for SCP-3000, which is something that I didn't know existed, and that's pretty damn cool to see. So a lot of other product advertisement going on here, disguised as sort of, mimetic and sort of grassroots posting. But then again, you have diamonds in the rough, like this Quantum's book. There is no anti-memetics division, which I think is pretty well recognized. People know about that who are in this space. So anyway, you occasionally get some lukewarm, some rather unevenly microwaved post-refrigeration takes like this, but even if you do, you tend to get pretty good meta-commentary on the actual wiki and the space in general. Alright, so what is going on next? So every week, if you don't check out, for example, the deleted page, the lowest rated page on the SCP Wiki, you probably are missing out. There comes across that page some very interesting material, stuff that is either too bad, too controversial, or whatever. to actually stay up. And in some cases like this one here, you get somewhat of interesting submissions that just don't quite cut it, but are definitely worth a look. So we have archived this one. It's obviously gone by now. This was several days ago with this rating of -7. But yeah, this is a joke article. I can't remember who it was written by. I think it's someone, Dr. P, something like that. But it's really a parody of 2316, which is that famous DJ Cactus article about the bodies in the water and how you don't recognize them. And so sort of in a meta-critique style, we have really a theme of mimetic sort of inoculation when it comes to telling people to upvote. So we've seen this sort of thing happen before where there's like this upvote, downvote commentary. There was an article written this week about a pataphysical entity. This was written actually by Rounder House that encouraged people to downvote it. Things like sort of meta games, sort of meta plays and meta moves like this that we see now and then. And so this one, if you look at it, is basically a straight stylistic rip. It's basically a clone of the original article, which is 2316. We can see that here just to look at the comparisons. Of course, a great article. We don't need to go into my own thoughts about this, but if you exclude the white hidden text, I think this is just an absolute, and the hidden collapsibles, I think this is just a stellar article. It doesn't get much better than this. But so this parody was interesting in that, it says things like, you will downvote this article, which ended up being sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, not because the article was compelling, mind you, because it was rather bad. And I think even the author of it decided to try to pull the how do you delete this kind of move in the comments that also didn't fly. So this is just an interesting thing. I'll put this once again in the links here just so you can look at it in case you missed it. It's worth a look. It's not great, but it's sort of chuckle worthy. I thought there was something just to point out that probably missed a lot of people's radars. So there is that link right there, and it is also in the Twitch. There you go. Most of our links are shared to the Discord server, so check that out. Hang out there if you're not. Sweet. So let's change gears. We will head to 05, talk about some political developments, see what's going on in really the closed, closeted, dark, smoky chambers of the space where all the power is and all the power players like to gravitate to. So this is 05.
Let's go out to start my weekend like this.
Oh, what's going on? Oh, I'm so sorry. I missed a few people showing up. Jane Bond, thank you so much for being here. And Elmer Doug, good to have you. All right, so we are making our way through our discussion today, and we've just landed on 05 and had our recommendation for the week, things like that. Check it out on the replay if you didn't. Some real good stuff there, I think. So let's talk about 05, and of course, speak of the devil, and we basically conjured up Almerduk to have help with the political commentary here, so appreciate that. So let's take a peek at a few things. First of all, this was something that I wasn't sure I was going to bring up because it has the potential to reflect poorly on us as a community, but I thought it was interesting. It does come back into play a little later in the show, so this is a disciplinary thread for one Dr. Caldall, aka Dr. Herrick. And so it turns out, unbeknownst to us, I would like to make that very public, unbeknownst to us here in the Discord server, Dr. Caldall had an alt account called Dr. Herrick, which he has since, I think, admitted to quite openly, even here, and a message back to the staff. But this was someone that is interesting to me because I have been reading the articles coming out of the SCP Wiki, and I noticed that Dr. Herrick was one of the most prolific ones, just posting and posting and posting several articles, and a few of which I thought were quite good. And so it was quite a shock to me to realize that this was someone who has run into trouble with the law at SCP before and decided that wasn't quite enough and is back again for another round.
Yeah, if we had known about this, we would have shamed him, because this is kind of dumb, to be honest. Also, He's very bad with alts.
Yeah, really sticks out like a sore thumb in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, like I said, if you go down here, they basically stripped the site of all the submissions, the successful submissions that were posted under this name. And a few of these, like I said, are pretty damn good. This one was a format screw that was liked. This guide to writing was an interesting thing that I think had a pretty damn good reception. It was up at like plus 90, I think, by the time it got deleted. And a few other things, obviously the author page as well. So I mean, if it was
hilarious.
if it was just a matter of writing, underneath an alt, just to submitting things to the site just for doing so, I think that would be different. But if you go and look at what they caught him over, cold posting, they see some similarities in grammar choices and word decisions. And similarity in behavior and interactions with specific site members. Multiple messages from CallDoll and chat platforms where Herrick is mentioned spontaneously. So, you're not doing yourself any favors, I'm sure, for that. And it is absolutely true that people are keeping an eye out in our own Discord from the SCP Wiki staff to report, back to HQ in this way. So, I think if you push it a little further than just contributing to the site, obviously that's not something that we want. We don't want active trolling. If you're gonna participate with the SCP in our Discord server, that's fine. Just keep it civil, and if you're gonna contribute, do something meaningful.
Caldwell is an annoying piece of shit, so we want some kind of collaboration in us and SCP staff. Would gladly accept this.
Yeah. So CallDoll, if you're here, I'll tag you just because we don't want to talk about your back behind your back. I hope you're here, but but kudos to you. I mean, like I said, some of these were really good. This is the kind of stuff that, in fact, I even sent Dr. Herrick a message and said, hey, I see that one of yours got deleted. It was really good. If you'd like to post it on Confic Magazine, let me know, because that's what we do. We basically we talent scout at the SCP, always on the lookout for articles that, what is one person's trash might be another person's gold. So it was funny to see this to me, because I basically sent a message just to Dr. CallDoll without knowing it, so that was nice. All right, and then moving on from that little funny thing, so we have an adult content curation proposal, and the interesting thing about this is, first of all, it states opening the thread here that the following proposal has been granted an exception by the admin team to be proposed during the policy freeze. So if you recall, last time we talked about a policy freeze that was enacted that is basically a result of this charter rewrite and basically trying to have all hands on deck to get that pushed through in a timely manner. We had a very lively discussion about that. Without going into that again, this was an exception to that policy freeze. And it is about basically, assigning responsibility to a specific team for ensuring that adult pages are tagged with this new splash system.
Of course, it's a new team. Of course, it's a new team.
I don't know if it is a new team. Is it?
I think it is.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's a bummer. Yeah. I think they talk about Mast. Oh, yeah. You're right. Look, a new sub-team of Mast.
New team.
Yeah,
of course.
It's like it's a constantly budding thing. So it says it's not going to have a designated section head, but we all know that at some point the leadership role will be created, and you'll have another captain, hierarchy there. So just more examples of bloat. And I think the interesting thing about this was that this adult content splash page thing was recommended a year ago, perhaps. And so it was a little haphazardly dealt with. You can read into that if you want, as to what that means for, sort of the commitment to the issues that are surrounding the need for this adult content splash page. But so this is, ultimately something that I think we're happy to see. I mean, obviously, if they're going to be the sort that wants to try to curate these things and make sure that these warnings are there for the right people, then this is happy to see this, and we have a lot of people who are volunteering for this team, so hopefully it'll be an efficient one.
I wonder how, what's the line between adult content and normal content? Because There's a lot of articles that make references to like genitals or sex as a concept that don't necessarily feature it like prominently as part of the story.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be partially their job because it's it's one of those things where I don't think are ever going to be able to nail down exactly. It's probably good to leave it a little fuzzy on the edges there, but I suppose that'll be something that they sort of try to figure out. It does say here that they're going to have gut feeling, and specific mentions are going to drive the determination as to whether or not it's adult content or not. So. I mean, I think that's okay. It's probably the best you can do.
Like 2 months from now, maybe earlier, 2 months from now, someone is going to tag an article as adult content against the desires of the author. Is going to complain, and it's going to raise a storm. Who's going to try to get some official definition instead of what is an adult content article. And that's going to take like a full month or two. And it's going to have a huge fucking thread in 05 with a mirror in main with a lot of usual political noise, and wastes of time and vitriol. It's just set up for this to happen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're getting really good at the calling, at the prophecies coming up here. So we'll earmark this claim and certainly come back to it and kind of laugh about it when it happens. But yeah, I mean, just the general trend is that the bureaucracy that we see on 05 treats really any sort of ambiguity as totally antithetical. It's almost something that just they can't help but let get under their skin to the point where they have to. We talked about this, I think, last week with the Zeno's paradox. They have to try to define every incremental step in the whole way to get to something with nothing left not overturned in the process. And so there's really an impediment to progress this way. It's just a very inefficient system by being so paralyzed by your own demands for analysis. But yeah, and then even pushing that a little further, Almerduck, I think that's going to actually spill over into content warnings as well. So what we're seeing for adult pages, I think at some point has the potential, maybe not will, but has the potential at least to sort of subsume general trigger warnings and content warnings. And so, of course, the same thing is going to happen to that effort. I think it's going to probably lend itself very quickly to debate, particularly with the staff who are giving these designations and the authors who may not feel like it is warranted.
I'm not sure about content warnings. Like, in general, I'm more or less in favor of them. I think it's a good optional choice for the author, so long as it's not, as long as it doesn't stick out enough as something that breaks immersion. But it would seem kind of stupid to have like the content warning standardized for a site that is known in the public sphere for horror. Like, the point is horror. A lot of the most famous articles are exclusively about body horror, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good point. It certainly seems like the place where you would go into an understanding that might be something that you would see, and so perhaps if you're that squeamish about something where it would trigger you on something like a creative writing site, like this, where basically any topic is fair game, and certainly a horror direction is often taken. You might rethink why you're there or if you should be there. And then, of course, there's more of a logistical thing happening here where a trigger warning is essentially supposed to give you a heads up about otherwise being slapped in the face with some, content that might disturb you. But, it basically doesn't remove that slap. It just puts it more directly up at the front. And in fact, maybe even a little more bluntly, if you ask me. All right. So Jane Bond says, hey, this is from our Death Battle Matchups. That's a subreddit that I'm not too familiar with. It's made by Robotic Miner 285, and then Jane Bond suggested and requested that they do this. And it looks as though, I wish I could share this image. Maybe I can. But it looks as though it's a mashup of...
You can open the link, I think.
Okay. Here we go. So it's a mashup of, I think, 096 and basically what is, I guess, taken to be the RPC equivalent. I can't remember what number this is over here on the right, this green guy.
042.
042, thank you. Yeah. So there's a death battle Interesting death battle. And then the Owl Dude says, this isn't really related to the current conversation, but I found an untapped aquifer of laughs in this site. And so this is a web archive. Let's take a quick look at this together. Somebody's going to troll me one day and send me something that I shouldn't instantly put on to the cast. What the hell is this?
Oh, that's a Nickelodeon show. Like, it had some kind of it's like a Monster of the Week show, but with different like, special monsters, I think.
Wow.
I remember there was an episode for like vampires that were also hamsters, like human vampires that were also hamsters. When instead of having long fangs, they had like long incisors.
Wow. Okay. And so it looks like the field notes that Aldu says, all the field notes are written by children, and it's just charming to read through all of them. People like Bobo say, someone please help. This thing got released into our HQ by someone in all caps, and it broke our monstrapental regulator. So, so Nickelodeon James Bond does have a Confic show. We didn't know about it until now, but it even kind of is reminiscent of the RPC logo up here. When was this made? It looks like the earliest capture. The earliest capture is 2009, and then this capture is from 2011.
Yeah, the show was released in 2009.
Wow, look at that. Wow, a little ahead of its time. Good job. So this is fun. Did not know about this, but basically Nickelodeon has something like a Confic series. So kudos, good job. All right, moving on. I did want to point this out just back to the conversation about the tagging and the adult content splashes. So this is the 04 equivalent. Once again, this is the on-site equivalent where you don't have to be 05, you don't have to be staff to comment and share your thoughts. And once again, obviously this has only been up for 3 days, but we don't really have any engagement. And I think this is sort of a silent canary in some ways because we don't see a lot of engagement with what the staff is doing. So either that means that the user base doesn't really care. Maybe they're not bothered in the way that they were, say, at the town halls. But on the other hand, it seems as though the lack of engagement, the lack of discussion, of communication, has the potential to be a little concerning too, because I think that a lot of things are happening that have the potential to bubble up in a similar fashion. So I just wanted to point out that for better or for worse, as a good thing or a bad thing, there doesn't seem to be a lot of engagement from the community with a lot of the stuff that staff is doing lately.
I'm not sure if it's a thing of disapproval, like they just don't care, or it's a thing of approval, like they don't see anything to criticize, so they don't post.
Exactly. So it's like this sort of uncollapsed probability wave that if it's one way or the other, I'm sure it'll make itself known. But anyway, so I do think the splash pages are good. It's good that they're making that a little more reinforced and just a little with a little more clarity as to how that's going to work. So
yeah, just like content warnings, I think they're good to have. Just would prefer if the site in general was understood like to be under a blanket over 18
yeah, it's
or 18 trigger warning thing.
Yeah, it'll continue to be a very touchy subject, I'm sure. Definitely don't envy them with that job. It's they got themselves into quite a mess.
Good lord.
Yeah. All right. So then other things. This is something small, but Yasi Posse had been away from the wiki for a little bit, and then they say they're going to take another break for mental health purposes, which is something that we see just all too often from people on the 05. So just wanted to point that out, and then obviously wish Yasi Posse a good mental health recovery.
It's not just like specifically about Yossi, but it's just like how this kind of you see one of these like once per week if you look at 05. It's kind of worrying, really worrying how everyone has mental health issues and has to quit it very often.
Yeah. I mean, now I have a lot. Almar Duck here the same way. We have just a lot on our plate, so. Yeah, I think we can empathize with the fact that sometimes the work gets so overwhelming that you don't want to just put it down for a minute. And it might be a very, very healthy thing to do that, but I don't want to question anyone's commitment to this. But at the same time, it obviously has to get really, really bad for you to want to step away. So, for example, Yossi says, I intended to do next to no staff work during the period of Passover, but I was forced back in due to a pressing matter that ultimately drained me beyond belief and has already strained me more than normal. And so this is obviously, something that's very meaningful to someone like Yossi this Passover. So it's just curious to me to wonder what could be so pressing as to remove you from the sanctity of an oasis, like Passover, to pull you back. I wonder if this is sort of what we're seeing is an overemphasis of people taking their role a little too seriously. I mean, I don't know if anything could be that important, but I guess it is.
This is a common theme, I think. I've seen Uranium Empire, I think is their name. I'm not sure. They are also Jewish, and they also sometimes skip their free how to call them, because there are days where you're not supposed to use digital devices or work. I don't know how to describe them. I'm very bad with this kind of tradition, and they're supposed to take a break, but they don't for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little weird because this kind of thing is very significant. It's profoundly significant if you belong to this kind of religion.
Yeah, and it reminds me
that it's more or less a recurring thing is kind of bizarre.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of something that actually some wisdom that DJ Cactus dropped on his Twitter not too long ago, where he was saying that he shared a story which was interesting about how it was during the time of the Scp-3000 Contest, and it was just wrapping up, and so obviously this was going to be who gets the slot. It was going to decide who won. And he told the story on his Twitter of how instead of going and visiting with his family, who were gathered together for some reason, perhaps for something like this, a celebratory gathering like this, and instead he was sort of glued to his screen a little more than he should, because he just wanted to see, the timer click down and I suppose his entry win. And so he went on to sort of comment on this, and once again, a mature fashion that I respect, in saying that this was obviously a sign that this was a little too unhealthy mentally. It was a little too gravitational. I shouldn't have gotten that serious. I should have been able to divorce myself from something that I really wasn't even controlling. Just let it happen and come to it later, kind of thing. And so he regretted this because he was reflecting on those times that he could have been more present with his family. And I think we all have that sort of nagging at us. I'm sort of a workaholic, so I have that as well to think about. But, I think that's really the similar parallel that we're seeing here, is that if you're being pulled...
This isn't a Cactus thing. It's very common.
Yes, exactly.
It happened to me when I started writing. I had this kind of contest for the Spanish branch of SCP. It lasted for 2 weeks, which matches with the winter break. It's 2 weeks. And in that time, I was with my mom, who I do not live with. I just visit twice a year. And I spent the entire winter break rushing through my entry, which was a very long, very dense. And the last day of the break, got some very thorough critique for it, and it kind of just sucked. It broke the article apart, and realizing what I had done, wasting all of that time in an entry that was just unsalvageable, instead of spending the time that I could with my family. I broke down crying that day because I wasn't yet used to that kind of disappointment.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to balance, and everybody struggles with it, I think. And so once again, we can empathize with something like this, but at the same time, this may be sort of a moment to reflect on just how officious something like the O5 can become. And that's really the vocab word of the day, by the way. It's one of my favorite words right now. Officious. It means assertive of authority in an annoyingly domineering way, especially with regard to petty or trivial matters, intrusively enthusiastic in offering help or advice, interfering. That's sort of the word that I think describes a lot of O5 and how they sort of overemphasize their own necessity when it comes to things on the site. And so the only reason I'm mentioning this is not to poke fun at anyone, But just to say that we all sort of have this struggle, and maybe we can help each other out, in some ways when it comes to like that wall that you hit when, it probably should be a statement to you and other people who are watching. But sometimes people just plow right through that wall at the same time.
Yeah, take care.
Yeah. Okay, and that leads pretty well actually into the next topic. So we're off of O5 for a second, and we're actually back out into the Twitter sphere of SCP. And so this was something that popped up this week. I think it was, a couple days ago, maybe the 3rd of May. This is Lady Summer Isle, and if you don't know, this is Kinch the Knife Blade, who, if I didn't know anything about but their writing, I would be a huge fan of. I think Kinch's writing is spectacular. Their 3000 contest entry is magnificent, and they have a lot of articles that I think are well above average when it comes to compositional talent. But this was something that popped up on their Twitter and that was shared in our Discord server. And so this is a screen cap of a comment, and it may be on one of Kinch's articles, it may not be, but this comment from this individual goes on to say some things about a dog. I guess the article sort of invoked the memory of a recently deceased pet, like a dog. And of course, this individual it was a little too close to home for their emotions and decided to downvote for that reason. And so leaves this message just to at least sort of explain that. And so Kinch responded and said, that's a super weird reason to downvote a piece, and I would rather you didn't say anything. That makes me think that this is probably one of Kinch's articles.
Yes, it's 2420, I think, which
2420.
is titled A Good Boy, just so you know what the plot is like.
Yeah, there it is right there. It's actually mentioned in a reply. And so, this was something that, as you can see, got a fair amount of attention with 83 likes. And this was called out in our Discord server as something that was remarkably uncalled for. And the sort of thing that, we at our Discord like to point out because, when it comes to us, when it comes to what we've done and the wrong things that we've done, all these things are held against us to a very, very high standard in such a way that, we will never as a group be able to pass the purity tests that are put up as barriers from places like SCP. Just on the whole, whereas something like this can happen in their own community, and it's just as bad or worse than anything I think that any of us have done, and yet it seems to be loved and applauded. So it's just interesting to me to note that there's really no deeper principles at work here. It's just a matter of whether you're in or out.
On one hand, I understand where this comes from, because people venting their grief online can be annoying, especially if it's like something like a dog, where it's not all that important as a family member would be. But on the other hand, just lacking in empathy. There's this immense lack of empathy it comes from the same group that advocates for things like trigger warnings or making life easier for other people. I'm not against trigger warnings. I think they're good. I'm glad that they're becoming more common. And it seems bizarre that it's just kind of selective when people are being empathetic and when they're being fucking cold-hearted as fuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my point. I mean, it really is a matter of just if you're in the community, if you're quote unquote a friendly, and if you're not, all that sort of principled talk that people would try to front as something that's deeper than just nepotism is very demonstrably thrown out of the window as we see something like here. And I agree with you. I think that this is a terrible reason to downvote an article. It's not the author or the content's fault that it meshes so closely with something that they can't control, which is obviously the unfortunate death of a pet. But at the same time, it's just as bad, if not worse, to take it in the opposite direction. I think really what's at the basis of this is something else that we see all too commonly in the community, especially of SCP, which is I think all of this is because of the downvote. I think if this was a no vote, you wouldn't have had this post on Twitter. I think that because this is Kinch's article, this is really something that we'll see over and over again. It's an inability of people to actually come face to face with any sort of like negative reception, as if they intend or expect to be sort of glowingly praised in an unblemished fashion, so that when the downvote happens, that was, I think, deeply the emotional, sort of impetus for this post.
This noise is just kind of very strange because this article is like at plus 500 or something. So one downvote is like fucking nothing. And
right.
Response like this for a single downvote, an article that has 500 upvotes, comes off as, I don't know exactly the word. It's just, presumptuous maybe?
Yeah, well, it's insecure.
Sure
it's totally insecure. I mean, it's actually a very loud proclamation that upvotes are not going to be able to be a valid substitute for self-esteem. In fact,
especially because you can see that this person knows they are not acting rationally. They acknowledge that in their own post, and instead of like realizing that this person is overrun with grief and not dealing properly with it, and trying to help them or say, "Hey, dude, I want to take a break," or "Come and talk to me. I understand you're feeling." Understand how you feel about this thing, not the right way to talk about it, was just shaming them online and making a Twitter thread, call them out.
Yeah, this is.
If you look further down the thread, this person responds like the poster that made that post and the article.
Really?
They don't show up in the archive because it's an earlier version.
Yeah,
they show up and they say something like, "Oh damn."
I see. Yeah, well, I'm sure that wasn't very nice to that person. I mean, and so, what's also disturbing is you have just a whole bunch of, sort of NPC-like applause. People not really thinking about this very much. Just sort of the sycophantic response. You have
big-name authors as well.
Yeah, big-name people who are, quite honestly, quite disappointed to see. Like the David Lynch of Lit RPG, I think, is Dave U. Fool. So really something that I expected him to be above, for sure. And then, of course, Scantron comes in and says something like, the SCP Wiki really needs to stop encouraging people to share all of their inane opinions. Well, I hate to tell you, but that's the whole purpose of Twitter and the space that you're in. It's literally what it is. It is literally a machine.
It's bizarre coming from them.
It's so bizarre. It's just an absolute lack of self-awareness. I mean, that's exactly what your space is. And in fact, someone like Scantron epitomizes this more than anybody and encourages this sort of pining to people's every thought more than the usual person, because they're so isolated. They're so isolationist with regards to anything that they don't want to be around. So they just end up reinforcing their own ideas so much that they get into this space where they think that people do or should care about all their innate opinions. It's exactly what your Twitter is. But so just to go back to what you said, Elmer Duck, it's astounding to me that there was no disciplinary action. This goes back to a longer conversation that we've had over the course of several different media posts, where Kinch, basically because of the events of June 2018, is sort of the patron saint of the whole victimhood equals status mentality that I think has a deep root in the SCP culture. And so I think that's also why you see so many people jumping on board. You had really like smarter people, like the Great Hippo, come in and sort of file down the edges of this and try, like kind of what we're doing here, to sort of blend a little of these things together and not make it so just abutting to people's feelings. But on the whole, you have a lot of people who just want to agree, I think, with someone like Kinch, because she's really the trust fund kid of social points, of oppression points in the space. And so these people kind of just, in my opinion, what I see here is a bunch of people, crawling around the table for some crumbs. That's what I see.
I'm not sure how relevant the 2018 thing is. Just think this is a systematic issue rather than specifically relating to this person.
Yeah. I will say this to that Kinch is the sort of individual who leverages that experience incessantly in order to sort of cash in. on sort of sympathy points. And in fact, what makes this whole post very strange to me is not the fact that you're calling out somebody for a bad reason for downvoting, because once again, I agree. And it's not even necessarily that a lot of people who I thought better of, are championing this. It's that recently on Kinch's Twitter, they did the exact same thing this individual did. I hate to say this, but Kinch had a very unfortunate experience where I think a loved dog, I think vanished or something like that. It was something horrible, something that nobody likes going through, nobody should go through, and that I've gone through too, and is just a terrible thing. But it's just a very strange note to hit when what this individual is doing, lamenting openly, publicly about this, is something that Kinch did on their Twitter just, several tweets worth of this, just not maybe a few weeks prior. Very strange.
I don't understand where the sudden lack of empathy came from. Especially if you're going through this same thing. Couldn't you, instead of posting publicly, instead of making a Twitter thread about it, couldn't you DM this person and tell them, I empathize with you. I think your reason for downvoting is stupid, but just know that I'm going through the same thing. I hope you get better.
Yeah.
Doesn't something like that be more appropriate?
Yeah, probably. I guess the question is, why didn't that happen? And I'll leave that question for the listener and viewer to ask themselves and munch on. But I do want to come back to something you said, Almerduk, which is that this is something that I think there was a little bit of self-introspection over, because if we actually try to go to this tweet, this is obviously, as you say, an archive of this tweet, which is, it's once again a good thing that somebody did this, because currently that tweet has been deleted. It doesn't exist. So there's so I mean that's always the white flag in ways. I think hopefully that means that either someone from the SCP Wiki staff maybe got in touch with Kinch and said, hey, you should probably take this down, or one of Kinch's friends did this. But yeah, in any other setting, I think this probably would have been cause for disciplinary harassment. But it is nice to see that this is deleted in some ways. That speaks to me of some sort of recompense, some sort of recanting of the lack of empathy that we saw.
Just to put this into perspective, because the way we're narrating it, it sounds like Twitter drama. It sounds completely consequential. It sounds stupid. But what you should keep in mind is that the person being shamed online is an aspiring author, and the shamers in the situation are titles, people he's looking up to. So consider that on top of the degree of grief that has to get to you for you to knowingly do something wrong and knowingly bother other people with a downvote, with a comment in their articles, and then going online and seeing that you're being shamed for it. Shamed, I'll cope with your grief. I think it's very noticeable that I'm struggling to come up with the word to describe that, because it's fucking terrible.
Yeah, it's really beyond the pale. And I think you're right. There's some deeper social commentary here, which is really what this show is about. I mean, yes, it is a drama hub, but tell me honestly what Discord server or discussion, group discussion about a social circle isn't. But yeah, so I mean, the other thing to draw from this is kind of what you said, which is that this is somebody who's very not well established, and you're talking about people, big names, people who really probably should have a more responsible sort of posture to the site as people who are, essentially in the ruling class. They're in the upper echelon and tiers socially of the site. And so, it really is a very interesting moment to observe that you have people who have really every reason to not be bothered by something like this, and instead decide to react perhaps in the equal and opposite direction of that. This is something that we see all the time, for example, the higher you get in terms of popularity, the more sensitive you tend to get about downvotes, which is what we're seeing here. And so it just goes again to say that these things that people sort of base the whole social incentive ladder at SCP on are not things that can ever satisfy you. And that's really the point of talking about this drama, is that you have to have a deep internal personal standard for satisfaction. It's not going to come from likes. It's not going to come from upvotes. It's not going to come from popularity. It's going to come from just what you have inside of you and how you choose to express that, perhaps, let's say, in an SCP article.
If you give me the chance to post about myself for a bit, it's kind of...
Go ahead.
I don't want it to come off as egotistic. I am, relatively speaking, because it's a niche within a niche, popular in the Spanish SCP sphere. Have a bunch of somewhat famous articles. People say they admire me, and had a kind of positive feedback. Hasn't given me any satisfaction. I would just feel kind of terrible about it because I don't like any of those articles anymore. It didn't fulfill me. It's made me feel completely fucking terrible about the things I've written, and getting people to admire you when you don't think you deserve that kind of admiration is torture. Don't strive for that, because it's when you get there, it's not at all what you bargained for.
Yeah, very, very different view. It's easy to look at it and think the grass is greener, but you don't have to hit rock bottom to understand and even listen to people who maybe are trying to tell you better, that you don't really have to experience those depths in order to know how to avoid them and to work around them. So thanks for sharing that. That was really, really deep, actually. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
And then we'll finish this way, staying in the Twitter sphere. We still have some commentary to get through on the January recaps, but we'll save that for another time. That's really our fallback option. We have, I love that we have so much falling into our laps that I can't finish the January recaps. That's the way I want it to be. But so just to stay within the Twitter sphere, and just to go back to a motif that we're seeing of people who have really an outsized, a completely asymmetric social status, seemingly going after people who have, just dramatic fractions of that in terms of social capital. So this is something that we saw recently this week that was shared to this Discord server. And so this is Rounderhouse, and he's actually making a tweet about the streams that you might know from this actual Twitch channel, where I react to media in the containment fiction space. And this is really part of a larger discussion that I want to bring out, where people who have this a tremendous amount of followers and likes and attention seem to not be able to resist the sort of like very, very small mosquito-like pricks that are delivered by people who are 1/1000th of their size.
This is just extremely petty, and it's very funny to see him be kind of oblivious to the fact that this is just positive feedback. It's publicity. It's fucking publicity.
Well, let's get into that discussion, because this is something that I do a lot of. I mean, and like I said earlier this week, I did somewhat of a reaction to this in one of our nights streams. But if it weren't for reactions like this, I am counting on reactions like this. This is what I'm shooting for. This is the strategy. This is the marketing strategy. And so every time somebody does something like this, they do it because they feel like, first of all, they need to, which is a mistake. The world does not need your reaction necessarily. And there are times when you probably shouldn't bring any more attention to something like this. But yeah, so basically individuals like Rounderhouse, and then of course the individuals who commented on this as well, people like The Sherm, they cannot help themselves. They have to say something about this. And they think that is sort of the gotcha, because you're criticizing somebody and you're making them look bad. But in reality, this is what I want. This is exactly what I'm hoping to do. And in fact, D. Sherm actually, who's smarter than he looks, states this. He says they need us to take the bait, so our people will either watch or dunk on them. And a fraction of our folks may say they have some points and the hook is in them. That is 100% correct. And so it's interesting. It's exactly what I'm shooting for. It's my strategy in a nutshell, and it's worked for 3 years. It's the only reason why I'm not completely relevant is because people react this way continuously, reliably. So, it's ironic, I think, that this individual, the Sherm, kind of said this because by saying it, they basically gave me the attention they were trying to not give me. But Router House is the same way, which, by the way, I was a little disappointed for somebody who has, 4,000 Twitter followers and only 37 engagement likes here. That seems to be quite the discrepancy for that amount of followers. But, so this is something that we see all over and over again. In fact, Router House did it again this week. This is from yesterday, and this is I don't know if you know this, but this SCP Wiki can be divided into 3 classes. Is a reference to my author page manifesto, as they call it. So, I mean, once again, like, you have to understand what I'm going for here. You have to understand my strategy, because what this does for me is take that handful of people who see things like this and expose them to something that they never saw before. And like V. Sherm says, a few of those are going to agree or have their mind changed by it, at least influenced a little bit. Maybe a seed will be planted. And it looks as though, this is bad press. And it is. It's obviously they're ridiculing me and making fun of me. So you have to accept that. You have to just kind of live with it. But, it's nice. I'll say this. Despite the clear ridicule, I see this as a win. Because first, my stock, as far as SCP is concerned, is already as low as it gets. It's not getting any lower. It's already rock bottom. So there's really nothing to lose. 99% of the people there dislike and disagree with me. So, this sort of comment from Router House, while getting more applause than I can muster just from a sheer lack of social capital, is really only preaching to the choir. And what this does for me is take that relatively small percentage of people and actually introduce them to something, a viewpoint, an opinion, that they may never have come across before, and that even a fraction of those will actually agree with and get on board with. So, I might should
It's
be...
extremely funny that they're just kind of... I'm not sure if scared is the right word. Let's use that word to express myself.
Sure. It's not a bad selection.
The thing they're scared of is that people will agree. May
Right.
have some good points, though.
Right.
That's a scary thing. That's what you're afraid of. Really.
Yeah, and it's basically the same thing when you see like a person, a human being, react so reflexively to something like a small jumping spider that's like a tenth of the size of their fingernail. Like, it doesn't matter. The size discrepancy gets completely lost in the sort of fight or flight reaction from the person, who will jump out of the room and run out of the room and start screaming because there's this little innocuous spider that can't possibly do any real damage to them, but it's the mind game that happens. And so that's what I think is happening here. So the question is, when somebody has 4,000 followers, when somebody has 8,000 followers, the Sherm, for example, has 2 million followers, 2 million plus followers on his TikTok. So why are these people with all this, social capital spending time to, do this to little old me, who's got, maybe 6 or 7 followers on, let's say, something like Twitch? It seems almost as if sort of a shotgun approach to an ant. Like, if you went outside and you shot an ant with a shotgun, that might be a little odd. It seems to be a little bit of overkill. And so the question becomes, why is it that these individuals can't resist? Or the better question is, why can't they see that even in getting the satisfaction of making fun of someone like me for some things that I said 4 years ago, there's actually nothing in it for me but a benefit. That's airtime that would otherwise cost me a decent buck. So, this actually is happening all over the place. So if we see this is somebody who thinks that Totomo is me. Plague PJP is the one who said this. And there's another one that happened a few weeks ago, I guess, from Floppy Phoenix as well. So my name is being dropped all over the place, which is free advertisements. Router House has referenced me twice in 1 week on his Twitter. The Sherm referenced me. Flops is an influential person on the wiki, name dropping me. Plague PJP, somebody who's up and coming, also name dropped me. So, I think that these people, they can't look past just the immediate satisfaction of getting the haha gotcha, sort of making fun of somebody. I'm over here. I'm happy about this. I mean, yeah, like, obviously, it's not fun to be made fun of. Nobody likes that. But, as long as I can stomach that, as long as I can look past that, and as long as anybody in a situation like me can look past that, this is a win-win.
The sheer amount of seething that this kind of post instantly provokes. Like, if you mention config in any kind of CP circle, people are going to seethe real fucking hard. And something funny about that post by Flops is that the SCP Discord, their co-author in this article, 6705, which is Lord Stonefish, great thanking them for this post because they thought it was good crit, but they didn't realize it was a quote-unquote config goon, which is quite a funny title, and that's quite the validation. Like, they thought it was good crit, but now they have to discard it because it was a config goon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the double-blind study
Better
being revealed. Yeah, suddenly it was like, oh, I want that one, and then suddenly it's like, oh, okay, well, let's see what's behind door number 2. It's not who you thought it was. Suddenly you don't want it anymore. That's kind of telling. But yeah, so the same thing is happening here. These individuals who think that, who are trying to say that I'm this person here, I'm not going to confirm or deny that. Obviously, this is something that I enjoy. I enjoy happening. So I can't confirm or deny that allegation. But, once again, I'll just say, despite this clear ridicule, if you look at, Plague PJP, once again, this is the meme version of the first line of my author page. So, you're showing this to people who already think it's ridiculous. I mean, you're not going to really make any more headway there. It's already the case. The only thing you're doing is sending people my way who are going to be convinced by something like this. So I appreciate it. I should be paying you money, honestly. So I mean, and I would say to people who think that I'm this individual who's leaving these comments here, they're talking in this way like they have proof. So why not send it to the SCP Wiki staff? The SCP Wiki staff are itching to ban me. If they thought that I had an alt on their site, they would ban me instantly, maybe just with the whiff. You probably don't even have to give any evidence. We just saw them ban Dr. Caldall's alt with no definitive proof, just with circumstantial evidence that they took to be sufficient. So, the question is, why aren't they doing that here? These people are they making these accusations and they don't have proof? Maybe.
Say that you're going to get Port Totomo banned.
Well,
you're going to get them banned. They didn't do anything wrong. They're just in the crossfire.
Yeah, and so that's why this is an interesting situation to me to kind of watch. Because maybe the staff will ban this individual, but the problem with that is that if you're the SCP Wiki staff, this is a lose-lose, publicity-wise. The staff is not dumb, and so that's probably, in my opinion, that's probably the best explanation as to why, this account hasn't been banned. Because this sort of backlash only comes around when it's a negative comment. I'll add, just if you notice, it's only when a comment is negative that some reply like this happens. But if you're the SCP Wiki staff, these users, people like Plague PJP, people like Flops, and even people like Rounderhouse and D Sherm, they've taken the bait that was explicitly intended for that. They've taken the bait so much, and they're in the process of reviving me, on their own platform, that if I were staff, even though I don't like me, I'd think twice about doing a ban, because what you're going to do by that, if you actually enact the ban, that's even more publicity in the same exact fashion, which someone like me would be wanting, would be actually doing something like this for the explicit purpose of.
Yeah, it's also very noticeable, this kind of philosophy, because there hasn't been any disciplinary action against the alt accusations. Normally shit responses to crit, which have always been an issue. Normally those get disciplinary action. They get some kind of address from staff, and they haven't yet. So either they are currently discussing banning Totomo, or they're just there's a Spanish expression for this, which is making your eyes fat. Hacer los ojos gordos.
Beautiful.
Just ignoring the issue until it goes away.
Yeah, and the problem, I think, though, just once again looking at this just from somewhat of a separated degree, It's interesting because I think what'll happen is sort of like the Streisand effect or like the martyr syndrome. Because if, let's say, this account gets banned, so basically what that means from now on is that anytime anyone's going to leave, a thorough, let's say, criticism of something, hope to God that it's not negative, people are automatically going to have this boogeyman, this sort of like living in their head rent-free reaction to any criticism of this nature.
It's hilarious.
Yeah, so I mean, so the problem is that people like Plague PJP, people like Rounderhouse, people like The Sherm, people like Flops, whether Totemo is me or not, they're obviously bad mouthing me, which you can have. I'm going to let that stand. You can have that. There's a little bit of enjoyment in that, just as surely as there's a little bit of a sting on my end of that. It happens to everybody who gets made fun of. But the bigger picture here, there's more important things going on that result from this. So, for example, you're thinking that this person is me. So, if the staff decided to act on that, well, that's more publicity. And if we imagine that somebody is enacting a marketing campaign here, then staff just played into it even more. In fact, they amplified it. They put an exponent onto it. And the other thing is, if you do ban someone like this, or even if you don't, honestly, calling and sort of necromancing something that happened 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, back onto the site, in your own platform, on your own turf, willingly, by your own inability to resist commenting on it, which is the correct thing to do. What you're doing is you're creating situations like this. On the screen here, this is the Spartacus GIF, where suddenly everybody is Spartacus. Or right here, where the Garfield cat GIF, where everybody's Garfield now. You've set yourself up to be constantly on the paranoid lookout for something like this, to wonder if it's this guy again and again and again. And so I have to wonder, this is interesting for me to see, someone like me would be doing this with these exact effects in mind. So it's just interesting to see it play out. They also thought I was the author of SCP Disc J. So I mean, that wasn't me, Did they think that was me? I don't know. So anyway, just wanted to kind of end on that because, I am paying attention. They know I'm paying attention to it. I got to say, this is, if I'm gonna take a little left, I'll be more than happy to take that little left so that I can get that right hook in, because that's what I'm going for.
It's a very nice business relationship that we have with them right now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. This would cost me a lot of money. So they literally saved me, probably hundreds of dollars. I mean, just how much that would cost, how much that attention would cost. So, yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, I hope that this Totemo individual keeps commenting, because I love to see this happen. I love to be brought up on enemy platforms, people who don't want me there, who don't want to mention me. I love that. This is a win for sure. So I'm not confirming or denying anything. I love the ambiguity, and I'm gonna be happy to see how this plays out. Either way, it's kind of a 6 one way, half a dozen the other kind of situation. So anyway, just thought I'd address that publicly, because this show is the most watched, and I felt like it's really my only chance to respond in a way that might be meaningful and that people might see. So thank you for indulging me on that.
It's been very nice. Very nice situation.
Well, all right. So I do want to mention this again. I'll say this throughout the week, but at the end of this week, I actually have to be out of town. I'm going to a funeral, which is never fun. So I will not be around this next Saturday. So we are not going to have an episode of SCP Meta come a week from today. We'll just have to skip it that week and pick it up the next one. Again, we do our weekly, very granular gauntlet of all the SCP articles that come out in a given week on the SCP Wiki on Friday nights. Won't be able to do that either, but we will still do that. We'll push it to Sunday evening instead and just take more articles on. And of course, Thursday night, which is typically a very casual reaction night, something like what Rounderhouse was calling out here. We react just to podcasts of a variety of different things. That on Thursday will be canceled as well, just because I'll be out of town. But we'll pick this up next week. We're still going to do the nightly reaction streams on Monday and Tuesday of this coming week. So I hope that you'll join us for that. And thank you very, very much for participating. That I will do. Jane Bond, as always. Almerduk, it's been so nice to have you showing up recently. I really, really appreciate that. and everybody else who joined. I want to thank you so much. Hope you have a really, really great weekend and a great week, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. This has been Lack of Lepers, aka SPCRNP, and I appreciate it so much. And see you next time. Have a good one.
Yep.